You are nothing but a hired help, until the room froze when they learned her ideas were worth more than every legacy name laughing. Stay with us. What begins as quiet heartbreak becomes undeniable power, because every voice they tried to erase was always meant to rise. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. The house woke before the sun, and Jenny Hill was already moving through it. Soft footsteps across imported stone, fingers smoothing silk cushions no one would notice unless something was wrong. She moved with the precision of someone who had learned that perfection was the only way to avoid being seen as a problem. In this mansion overlooking the city, she existed as function, not presence. A woman expected to serve, never to imagine. Light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on her skin as she crossed the living room. She was beautiful in a way that required no permission. Deep brown eyes that carried stories, features shaped by strength and restraint. Grace that did not ask to be admired. But beauty did not protect her here. It only made people assume she belonged to the background. Decorative and replaceable. They called her the maid. Not Jenny, not Miss Hill, just the maid. Voices floated past her as if she were part of the furniture. Conversations about investments and vacations and futures that never included someone like her. She learned to keep her gaze lowered, her expression calm, her presence quiet. Dignity had become an internal act, yet inside her lived a fire that refused to go out. In the early hours before anyone else stirred, Jenny allowed herself small rebellions. A folded notebook tucked into her apron, a pen hidden between cleaning supplies. While the house slept, she sat at the kitchen counter and sketched her dream. A business built from skill and vision, not survival. Numbers and ideas flowed from her mind with clarity and care. She had studied quietly, watched patterns, learned from every room she cleaned. She believed in her idea with the kind of faith that comes from knowing what it means to have nothing. By mid-morning, the house filled with noise and perfume and expectation. Laughter rang through hallways polished by her hands. Someone made a joke about her working too slowly. Another commented on her ambition after overhearing a fragment of her dream. The laughter followed her down the corridor, light and careless and cruel. Jenny swallowed the familiar ache and kept moving. She had learned how to survive mockery without letting it bend her spine. Asher Scott arrived later than usual. The energy of the house shifted when he stepped inside. He carried himself like a man accustomed to command, tall and composed, his presence sharpening the air. He was known for his discipline, his success, his refusal to tolerate incompetence. People straightened when he entered rooms. Voices softened. Decisions changed. Jenny felt him before she saw him. She was wiping the long dining table when his reflection appeared in the polished surface. Their eyes met for a brief second, unexpected and charged. He did not look through her. He looked at her, as if something about her stillness had caught his attention. He noticed the notebook later, resting beside the sink as she reached for a glass. He did not comment, did not ask, just watched her a moment longer than necessary, curiosity flickering behind his controlled expression. Jenny felt the weight of that gaze and steadied herself. She was used to being watched for mistakes. This felt different, unsettling in a way she could not name. When he finally spoke, it was not a command. It was a question, simple, human. Jenny answered carefully, her voice soft but steady. She returned to her work, heart beating faster than it should have. She told herself it meant nothing, that powerful men did not notice women like her, that no one ever truly listened. She was wrong. In a house built to overlook the city, a man who owned everything had just begun to see the one woman everyone else had erased. Asher Scott had learned early that power was something you wore like armor. He wore it well, tailored suits cut sharp as intention, a posture that left no room for doubt, a voice that ended conversations without ever rising. The world saw a man who had conquered his past and built an empire from discipline alone. A man who did not bend. A man no one touched unless invited. He had grown up counting coins on a kitchen table that never stayed warm long enough for dinner to feel safe. He remembered eviction notices and the sound of his mother crying behind closed doors. Every brick of his fortune had been laid with hunger and resolve. Success had not softened him. It had sharpened him. Inside his home, silence ruled. Not peace, but control. Every object placed with intention, every room designed to impress but never to invite. People moved through the house carefully. Staff kept their distance. Lives intersected with his only when necessary. Until Jenny Hill. At first, she registered as efficiency. The house ran smoother when she was there. Dust vanished. Spaces felt calmer. But then he noticed the way she moved. Not hurried, not timid, intentional, as if every step mattered. Her presence changed the air without asking permission. He noticed her hands, strong and gentle. Hands that knew work, but also patience. He noticed her listening. Not the polite nodding others offered him, but real attention. When conversations drifted through the house, she absorbed them quietly, learning, measuring, understanding. One evening he paused in the doorway without meaning to. She stood at the counter, reading something she quickly folded away when she sensed him. For a moment she looked startled, then composed herself with a dignity that caught him off guard. She did not apologize for existing. She simply acknowledged him and returned to her task. That unsettled him. He began to watch without intention. Small things, the way she organized chaos without being asked, the way she spoke only when necessary but never wasted a word, the way she carried herself like someone who knew her worth even when the world insisted otherwise. The house heard laughter one afternoon that did not belong to him. It cut through the halls, light and brief. It came from the kitchen, from Jenny. And then it stopped abruptly as others entered the room. He saw her shoulders still, saw the way something closed behind her eyes. Later he heard the mockery, quiet, casual, as if cruelty were nothing more than background noise. He watched her absorb it without protest, without collapse. That was when something shifted. Asher had spent years believing respect was earned through dominance, that survival meant never revealing the soft parts. But watching Jenny endure dismissal with such grace cracked something open. She did not fight to be seen. She simply remained. The first real conversation happened without planning. He asked her what she was reading, not to test her, not to assert authority, to know. She hesitated, then answered honestly. Her words were careful, but her mind was sharp. Ideas unfolded between them slowly. She spoke of systems and patterns, of improvement, of a vision that reached far beyond the walls she cleaned. Asher listened, truly listened. He felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his certainty, not desire alone, though that came later. It was recognition, a sense that power had blinded him to something vital, that brilliance did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it worked quietly while others slept. When the conversation ended, the house felt different, too quiet, too empty. Asher stood alone in a room he owned completely and realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he wanted to be worthy of what he had just seen. Night settled into the mansion slowly, the kind of quiet that arrived only after power dimmed and expectations loosened their grip. The city glowed beyond the windows, distant and alive, while the kitchen became something else entirely. A private corner of warmth and flickering light. A place that did not belong to anyone important. A place where rules softened. Jenny stood at the counter with her shoes kicked off beneath the sink, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring leftovers in a pan that had already lived a long life. She laughed when it burned slightly, the sound light and unguarded. It surprised her as much as it filled the room. Laughter was rare here, especially hers. Asher leaned against the opposite counter, jacket draped over a chair, tie loosened and forgotten. The armor was off. Not entirely gone, but resting somewhere close enough to reach if needed. He watched her without the weight of authority pressing forward. Just a man observing a moment he did not want to end. They ate standing up. Forks clinked softly against plates that did not match the rest of the house. The food was simple, the conversation even more so. He asked where she grew up. She answered carefully at first, then with ease. Words began to move between them without fear of correction. She told him about long bus rides and borrowed books, about learning early how to listen more than she spoke. He told her about hunger and pride, about learning discipline as survival rather than ambition, about how success had never filled the spaces it promised to. The words surprised him as they left his mouth. He rarely spoke of these things, especially not here. The kitchen seemed to lean closer around them. At some point, the laughter faded into something quieter, something deeper. Jenny hesitated before speaking again. Her hands stilled. Her gaze dropped to the worn surface of the counter. The moment carried weight. She told him about her dream. Not in grand declarations, not with polished certainty. She spoke with trembling honesty, a business she had imagined piece by piece, a vision shaped by skill and patience, and nights spent believing when no one else would. She spoke quickly at first, as if bracing for interruption, for dismissal, for the familiar laughter that always came. It did not. Asher listened. He did not interrupt. Did not correct, did not smile politely. He leaned in slightly as if proximity alone could help him understand better. His eyes stayed on her face, on the conviction fighting its way through her fear. The idea took shape in the space between them. Real, possible, worthy. For the first time in her life, someone with power treated her dream as something solid. Something that could exist in the world without apology. The air changed. It grew warmer, heavier, charged with something neither of them named. Jenny felt it in the way her breath slowed, in the way her shoulders relaxed despite the danger of it. Asher felt it too, a pull he did not command, a presence that refused to be ignored. They stood too close without meaning to. Silence stretching thin, not awkward. Intimate, the kind that spoke louder than words. This was the line no one had told them about, the one that blurred roles and rewrote rules. Employer and employee no longer fit the shape of what was happening. Something more human pressed forward, something risky. Jenny stepped back first, her instinct for survival rising. She thanked him softly and gathered the plates. The moment fractured but did not disappear. It lingered in the space she left behind. Asher watched her go with a heaviness he did not recognize. He had spent years controlling outcomes, measuring risk, protecting himself from desire. But tonight something slipped through, a truth he could not ignore. Power had never felt this dangerous before. The laughter did not come all at once. It arrived in pieces. A snort behind a hand, a glance exchanged too quickly, a voice raised just enough to be heard. Jenny felt it before she understood it the way you feel a storm before the sky darkens. She was in the hallway near the kitchen when it happened, speaking softly. Careful as always, she had forgotten for a moment where she was. forgotten that walls here carried sound and that dreams spoken aloud could be treated like jokes. Someone had overheard her talking about her idea, just a fragment. Enough. The first laugh cut sharp and bright. Another followed. Words slipped into the air light and careless. Comments about ambition, about knowing one's place, about how imagination looked ridiculous when worn by the wrong person. The word made landed like a verdict. Jenny stood still. Her hands trembled, but she did not let them see. She kept her spine straight, kept her face calm. Years of survival had taught her how to absorb humiliation without cracking, but inside something folded in on itself. She felt eyes on her, measuring, judging, deciding. Sideways glances that dismissed her before she could even finish a thought. Someone asked if she planned to clean her way to success. Another wondered aloud who had filled her head with such ideas. She wanted the floor to open, or better yet, to harden beneath her feet and hold her up. Later that evening, Asher hosted guests. People who carried wealth like inheritance and certainty like air. They filled the living room with polished laughter and effortless confidence. Jenny moved through them with practiced invisibility, glasses refilled, trays balanced, words exchanged over her head as if she were not there. Then someone mentioned her dream, not kindly. It was framed as curiosity, but carried teeth. A remark about staff getting ideas, about ambition without credentials, about how dangerous it was when people forgot where they belonged. Laughter followed again, this time louder and sanctioned by comfort. Jenny felt heat crawl up her neck. She kept moving, kept serving, kept her eyes down. Shame settled heavy in her chest. Not because she had been wrong, but because she had dared to believe she was allowed to want more. Asher heard it. He felt it like a jolt through his body. The mockery landed wrong, too familiar, too cruel. He saw Jenny from across the room, the way her shoulders tightened just slightly, the way her pace quickened, the way her face closed. He recognized that look. He had worn it once, but the room was full. Expectations pressed in. Eyes watched him as much as they watched her. Silence became a choice, one he made in that moment. The laughter continued. Jenny disappeared into the background where they expected her to stay. Later, she stood alone in the small laundry room, hands resting on the edge of the machine as if it were the only solid thing left. Her notebook felt heavier in her apron. Ridiculous now. Childish, dangerous. She told herself the dream had been foolish, that she had overstepped, that the safety of quiet survival was better than the pain of public scorn. She folded the notebook closed without opening it. That night she cried without sound, for the girl who had believed, for the woman who had almost trusted hope, for the mistake of thinking permission was ever hers to give herself. In a house full of voices, Jenny Hill learned how quickly dreams could be laughed out of a room, and how deeply silence could wound. The room fell quiet in a way that did not feel polite. It felt startled. Voices stopped mid-sentence. Laughter dissolved into discomfort. Asher Scott stood at the center of it all with his hands relaxed at his sides and his expression unreadable, the kind of stillness that made people nervous. He had listened long enough. The comment had been small, framed as humor, disguised as observation. But cruelty did not need volume to be sharp. It needed permission. And for the first time in that room, Asher did not grant it. He spoke calmly, not loudly, not angrily. His voice carried the weight of final decisions and closed doors. He said her name, Jenny Hill, said it clearly, correctly. The sound of it landed like a correction the room had not realized it needed. He spoke of intelligence and discipline, of ideas that deserved respect regardless of where they came from. He spoke of effort and vision and the arrogance of assuming greatness only lived where comfort had always existed. Every sentence stripped something away from the confidence in the room. No one interrupted him. People shifted in their seats, glasses lowered, eyes avoided his. They had never been told no like this, never been reminded that power could be used to protect instead of dominate. The shift was unmistakable. A line had been crossed, and it was not hers. Jenny stood frozen near the doorway. Her heart thundered in her chest. She did not know where to look, did not know whether to feel grateful or exposed. She felt seen in a way that terrified her. When the room finally breathed again, the damage was done. Conversations resumed, but nothing felt the same. Asher had made a choice, and everyone knew it. That night, the house felt too large, too quiet. Jenny moved through it slowly, unsure of where she belonged now. She stopped in the kitchen and rested her hands on the counter, trying to steady herself. Asher found her there. No audience, no posture, just a man standing across from a woman whose world he had just tilted on its axis. He apologized, without excuses, not for speaking, but for waiting too long. His voice was low, honest, the armor gone. Jenny did not answer right away. Her emotions tangled together: fear, relief, anger, longing. She told him she had learned how dangerous it was to hope, how believing had cost her before. Her words trembled, but she did not pull them back. He listened. Again. The silence between them grew heavy, charged. Their proximity felt different now, awareness sharpened. His presence no longer just unsettling, but intimate. Too intimate. She should have stepped away. Instead, she stayed. Vulnerability slipped in where caution had lived. She saw the man beneath the power, the boy who had been dismissed, the hunger that had driven him forward. He saw the woman beneath the restraint, the strength she carried quietly, the dignity that had survived everything thrown at it. Their hands brushed. Accidentally, deliberately. It sent a current through them both. Breath caught. The moment balanced on a fragile edge. They crossed the line together. Not recklessly, not easily, but with the full knowledge that once crossed, it could not be undone. The intimacy that followed was not hurried. It was careful, heavy with meaning, with the weight of consequences neither of them named. Later, Jenny lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Reality pressed back in. The imbalance between them loomed large again. Wealth and power and risk. What had felt like protection could become a shadow. Asher stood at the window, unable to sleep. He understood the danger, not just to reputation or comfort, but to her, to what she was still trying to build. They had crossed a line, and neither knew yet whether it would set them free or tear them apart. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale light slid through the tall windows and settled on surfaces that had never known uncertainty. The mansion breathed the same as it always had, steady, controlled, untouched by consequence. Jenny stood in the quiet of her small room, holding a single bag that carried everything she was willing to take. The rest she left behind without regret. She had not slept. Every hour had been spent listening to her own thoughts, arguing with her heart. Gratitude battled pride. Fear pressed against resolve. She knew what people would say if she stayed, that she was lucky, that she had been chosen, that her success would never truly be hers. She refused that story. She moved through the house, one last time, touching nothing. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. The walls stood indifferent. This place had given her shelter, but never belonging. Not really. Belonging required equality, and she could not afford to trade her dignity for comfort. Asher found her at the door. He looked undone in a way she had never seen before. No suit, no authority in his stance, just a man who realized something precious was slipping beyond his reach. He asked her to stay, not with commands or promises, but with honesty. He spoke of protection and opportunity and the future they could build together. Jenny listened and felt the ache of it. She told him what it cost her to be here, how every kindness came with an unspoken debt, how her dream would always be questioned if it grew in the shadow of his power. She needed to fail or succeed on her own terms, to know that if she rose, it was because she had earned it, not because someone opened a door for her. Her voice did not shake. She told him she loved what they had shared but could not afford to lose herself trying to keep it. That love without courage was not enough. That belief spoken in private meant little if silence followed in public. Asher said nothing. He did not interrupt. He finally understood that wanting her was not the same as standing beside her. That protection could look a lot like control if courage never followed intention. Jenny stepped past him. The door closed softly behind her. Asher stood alone in the space she left behind. The house felt hollow, too large, too quiet. For the first time, his power meant nothing. He realized he had defended her once when it was safe, when it did not cost him anything that mattered. He had waited when waiting was easier. Now she was gone. Outside, the air was sharper. Real. Jenny breathed it in like a promise. The city did not soften for her arrival. It did not make space. It did not care. She adjusted the strap of her bag and walked anyway. Every step forward was an act of defiance. She rented a small room with peeling paint and thin walls. She worked temporary jobs. She faced rejection dressed as politeness. Doors closed. Some never opened, but her idea remained alive, growing stronger because it belonged to her alone. At night, she opened her notebook again. The pages no longer felt foolish. They felt necessary. Across the city, Asher sat in rooms full of influence, unable to focus. Success rang hollow. He replayed the moment she walked away and understood the truth. He could no longer ignore. Love demanded courage. And he had been afraid. By the time he decided to change, she was already building something the world could not erase. The city did not welcome Jenny Hill with open arms. It met her with locked doors and polite refusals that sounded kind but landed heavy. She sat across from desks that smelled like coffee and doubt. She spoke carefully, confidently. She presented her idea with clarity and preparation. And still the answers came back the same. Not now, not viable, not the right fit. Banks smiled and slid forms back across polished tables. Investors glanced once and stopped listening. Some asked where her backing was. Others asked who stood behind her. When she said her name alone, the air changed. The laughter she had tried to forget echoed in her head, soft, mocking, persistent. At night, she returned to her small rented room and let the silence swallow her. She stared at the ceiling and wondered if they had been right, if ambition was a luxury meant for people born closer to power. Her notebook stayed closed some nights, the pen too heavy to lift, confidence thinned by repetition. She had always been strong, but strength did not mean invincible. Meanwhile, Asher Scott began to unravel in quiet ways no one noticed at first. Meetings blurred, decisions came slower. The satisfaction that once followed success never arrived. He stood at windows overlooking a city he controlled and felt smaller than he ever had when he owned nothing. He replayed the moments he chose silence, the laughter he allowed to pass, the way her shoulders had tightened, the way she had smiled anyway. He had told himself restraint was wisdom, that timing mattered, that protection could wait. Now he understood the cost. He learned the details slowly, not from gossip, but from truth. A mutual contact mentioned Jenny hesitating in meetings. A pause before speaking. a flicker of doubt where confidence once lived. Someone else mentioned how she flinched at laughter even when it was not aimed at her. The realization hit harder than any boardroom loss. He had not just failed to defend her, he had helped teach the world how to doubt her. Something hardened in him then. Not anger, not pride. Resolve, the kind that stripped excuses away. Power meant nothing if it was only used to preserve comfort. Influence meant nothing if it stayed hidden when it was needed most. Asher stopped waiting. He began asking questions, not quietly, not carefully. He reviewed rejection letters. He listened to recordings of pitch meetings. He saw how often she was interrupted, how often her ideas were reframed and handed back as if they belonged to someone else. He recognized the pattern because he had once survived it himself. Jenny reached her breaking point on a rain-soaked afternoon. She sat on a bench outside a closed office building and pressed her palms against her eyes. The city moved around her, indifferent and fast. She felt foolish for believing resilience alone could protect her. For believing dignity was enough. She almost walked away from the dream. Across town, Asher made a decision that would cost him comfort and reputation. The kind of decision men like him avoided. He understood now that silence had been his shield. Breaking it would make him visible in ways he could not control. But courage did not arrive gently. It demanded action. Jenny did not know yet that the world was about to shift again, that someone who once watched from safety had finally chosen to step fully into the storm. She only knew that standing still hurt more than failing ever could, and somewhere between her exhaustion and his resolve, the story began to turn. He found her where ambition had worn her thin, not in a ballroom or a boardroom, but in a quiet, shared workspace that smelled like burnt coffee and stubborn hope. Jenny sat alone at a long table surrounded by half-built ideas and unopened emails. Her posture was straight, but her eyes carried the weight of too many closed doors. Asher did not announce himself. He stood a few steps away and waited until she looked up. Surprise crossed her face, then caution. She had learned not to expect kindness to arrive without cost. He felt that distance and respected it. He did not begin with apologies, not because he lacked regret, but because he understood that remorse alone could not repair what silence had damaged. He told her he had listened, truly listened, to what she had endured, to how the laughter had followed her into rooms long after it stopped being audible, to how doubt had been planted where belief once lived. He told her he was ready to act. Jenny braced herself for offers wrapped in ownership, for contracts that would bind her dream to his name, for protection that required submission. She had seen it before. Power rarely arrived without strings, but Asher surprised her again. He asked what she needed, not what he could give, what she needed to move forward on her own terms. When she answered cautiously, he nodded and took notes, like her vision mattered. Because it did. He did not move her into his shadow. He stepped into the light beside her. The first time he spoke publicly, he said her name before his own. He introduced her not as someone he was helping, but as a founder whose work deserved attention. He did not speak for her. He handed her the room and waited. People who had once laughed leaned forward now. Investors listened. Questions shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Doors that had been locked swung open with embarrassing ease. Not because she had changed, but because the world had finally been forced to see what had always been there. Jenny felt the shift immediately, not triumph, validation, the quiet, powerful kind that restored something broken inside her. She stood taller, spoke clearer. Her hands stopped shaking. Asher stayed close, but never in front. He corrected dismissive comments without raising his voice, redirected credit back to her when others tried to give it to him. When deals were offered, he insisted her name stand alone, her work speak first. The same rooms that had once reduced her now echoed with her authority. Still, the imbalance lingered like a ghost. Jenny wrestled with the fear that none of this was truly hers. That belief borrowed could vanish as quickly as it arrived. She confronted him one night when the city hummed outside the window. He listened and did not argue. He told her that backing her meant trusting her to walk without him if she chose, that his role was not to save her, but to remove obstacles that should never have been there. For the first time, she believed him. Success did not come gently. It arrived with scrutiny and pressure and the familiar ache of being doubted. But this time she was not alone, not sheltered, accompanied. Asher watched her rise with something like awe. He had thought power was about leverage. He learned it was about restraint, about knowing when to step forward and when to step back. Jenny stood in a room that once would have laughed her out of it and spoke with steady confidence. She did not look at Asher for permission. She did not need to. He stood beside her, exactly where he belonged, and the world had no choice but to watch. The launch did not feel loud at first. It felt steady, like breath returning after a long hold. Jenny stood in a room that had once rejected her and felt the ground beneath her feet hold firm. Screens glowed with her name, her work, her vision articulated clearly without apology. She wore confidence the way she had learned to wear dignity quietly and fully. This was hers. People listened now. Not because a powerful man had arrived ahead of her, but because she had arrived fully formed. Questions were sharp and thoughtful. Interest genuine. Skepticism still lingered in corners, but it no longer defined the room. She answered without shrinking. She moved through the space with an ease that surprised even her. The pain had not vanished. Memory still surfaced without warning. Laughter from hallways, sideways glances, the weight of being underestimated. Success did not erase those scars, but it reframed them. It proved she had survived something that was never meant to be fair. Asher watched from the back. He had chosen that position deliberately, not hidden, not dominant, present without overshadowing. He felt pride swell in his chest as Jenny spoke with clarity and command. She did not look toward him for approval. She did not need to. That realization felt like freedom for both of them. He remembered the first time he had noticed her presence without understanding it, the quiet strength. The intelligence that had never asked permission. He had learned the hard way that love did not mean proximity. It meant space. Space to grow, space to fail, space to shine. When applause filled the room, it did not feel like validation. It felt like acknowledgement. Jenny accepted it with grace and restraint. She thanked her team, her mentors, herself. She did not mention luck. Afterward, people approached her with hands extended and cards offered. Opportunities unfolded naturally now. She chose carefully, asked the questions that mattered. She had learned that power could be intoxicating if you did not name it. She named it and kept her balance. Asher met her eyes across the room and smiled, not the smile of ownership or prideful claim, the smile of recognition, of witnessing someone step fully into themselves. He did not follow her through the crowd. He waited until the room thinned and the night softened. When they finally stood together, the space between them felt different, calmer, equal. Jenny spoke first. She told him she had done this without borrowing his name, that she had stood alone and felt strong. He nodded. That had been the point. He told her he was there because he chose her, not because he needed to lead her. They understood each other then. Love did not require rescue. It required choice. Over and over again. The city outside reflected in the glass like 1,000 possibilities. Jenny looked at her reflection and saw not the maid they had reduced her to, but the woman she had always been. Capable, resilient, radiant. Asher took her hand, not as an anchor, but as a companion. He stepped beside her not to guide, but to walk. Together they left the room, knowing something irreversible had happened. Not the launch. not the success, but the quiet understanding that power no longer stood between them. They had chosen partnership, and that choice changed everything. The city did not pause for their ending. Traffic moved, lights changed, people hurried past with their own private urgencies, but inside a quiet rooftop space above the noise, Jenny Hill stood watching the skyline as if she were finally seeing it clearly. The buildings no longer felt like barriers, they felt like witnesses. Her name lived out there now, on contracts, on storefront glass, in conversations that carried weight. Her work moved through the world without apology. It reached people who needed it. It stood on its own. She had dreamed of this moment in fragments, in tired mornings and borrowed notebooks. She had imagined success would feel like relief. Instead, it felt like arrival, not to a destination, but to herself. Asher stepped beside her without announcing it. No entourage. No authority in his posture, just presence. He had learned how to be still without disappearing, how to stand close without casting a shadow. They did not rush toward each other. They did not cling. What connected them now was quieter and stronger than urgency. They shared the kind of silence that no longer needed to prove anything. Jenny turned and looked at him fully, not with gratitude, not with caution, with clarity. She saw the man who had once confused power with safety, who had learned that courage demanded visibility, who had chosen to change not to keep her, but to honor her. Asher met her gaze and felt the absence of fear where it once lived. He did not need to save her. He never had. The truest thing he had done was step aside and let her rise. They spoke of the past without bitterness, the mansion, the laughter, the leaving. Each memory held its place without control. Pain had not vanished, but it no longer ruled the story. Jenny told him she no longer needed permission to dream, that the world still resisted, but she had learned how to push back without losing herself. He listened the way he always had, when it mattered most. Asher told her that loving her had taught him restraint, that believing in her had changed how he understood strength. He had learned that standing beside someone meant trusting their wings, not holding the ground beneath them. They moved closer, then not out of need, but choice. Their hands met easily, not claiming, not anchoring, just aligned. Below them, the city breathed and shimmered. Somewhere, a woman with a dream was being laughed at. Somewhere, a door was closing. Somewhere, a spark was trying to survive. Jenny felt the truth settle in her bones and understood why her story mattered beyond her own life. She had not been small. She had been unseen. Now she was visible on her own terms. Asher looked at her with something like reverence. Not for what she had achieved, but for who she had become. He knew his role in her life had been a chapter, not the title, and he was at peace with that. They did not promise forever in grand declarations. They promised honesty, presence, choice, again and again. As the night deepened, they stood together without chains, without roles, without rescue narratives to lean on. Just two people who had found each other in the ruins of expectation and chosen to build something truer from the ground up. Jenny's dreams lived loudly in the world now, and Asher stood beside her smiling, knowing the greatest act of love was believing she could fly long before she ever took off. Before you go, carry this truth forward. Every setback is shaping strength. Every dismissal is sharpening purpose. Share this video and be the reminder that the greatest triumphs rise from being underestimated. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.